We are running. Let us start the show for today, the 23rd of June, 2025, in our ongoing year of doom, or maybe years. Who knows what will be in store as we slog along into the exciting world of remembering where the hell my little menu is there. Whoops, I've lost my button to shut down. Oh, rabble snats. Trying to get up to the menu that as soon as I reach up to it, let's get rid of this here. There we go. Yikes. The menu that I needed to shut up off the highly stupid menu. Everyone, click on the right thing, suddenly it expends the thing out, and menus that should be popping up aren't popping up. So when I try to click over it, and I don't have a regular mouse anymore, I'm using the stupid little scratch pad on the laptop. Suddenly I'm not able to get where I want fast as that. So anyway, too bad. Such is the vicissitudes of life, though, compared to us bombing Iran. That's a relatively trivial oversight here in Spokane, Washington. As you know, we are continuing with our exciting world of going through one of the rare dinosaur books from a creationist perspective from 2022, Titans, and going through it effing source by effing source to find out just exactly where they are on the source documentation front. And they are now hitting some fresh territory of bad, including a one that I've really got to label a Trojan Source. Our part 2 will be about Michael Oard and his obsessions about non-existent prior ice ages. We'll get to that in a little bit there. And I watched today a really delightful autopsy that Dan Stern-Cardinale and Zach Hancock did on Sal Cordova, who apparently bit bullet. Dump needs to be impeached. Oh, yeah. And in a normal world where justice prevailed, that might actually happen. And it might still happen, even among the Republicans, if we hit some really big train wrecks and downsides for some of these things that are happening. But anyway, that's for only future to tell. The Cordova is now increasingly amiable, although he had a kind of snotty reputation in times past. Person who mutated from the intelligent design-ish old Earth creationism framework into a young Earth creationist, which is an interesting trajectory if you're claiming to do so on the basis of things. He's lost MTG. Oh boy, that's yes. How far out on the limb does one need to go in order to receive criticism from Marjorie Taylor Greene? Just as we've had that weird exchange where Ted Cruz was being grilled by Tucker Carlson. I mean, this is a very surreal world, and to some extent, you can expect this kind of frenzy to be a feeding frenzy to be going on more extensively as we move into increasingly bad times and things falling apart as camps within the MAGA movement start firing at each other because of their doctrinal eccentricities, plus the fact that there's not as much unanimity other than just simply the Trump personality cult. And when you get to the stage where suddenly the Trump personality cult doesn't matter because things are getting to the point where your local constituents are coming with pitchforks and flamethrowers, well, who knows what's going to be going on. So it's going to be an interesting few years ahead. Cordova's video was really quite intriguing. He was giving it a presentation at a regular scientific conference where you could just pay your fee and you come in and do your thing. And all Cordova could figure out to do was just to repeat piles of authority quotes. Yet so far below what you would have expected from where Sal likes to paint himself. He's kind of a follower of Sanford and genetic entropy. And the ostensible topic of his talk was about fitness. But anyway, so hunt up Zach and Dan on that one. It ran for about a couple hours today, and it's a delightful thing to see because you have two people who are knowledgeable about the field and can comment about how Sal is misrepresenting sources that he's bringing up. Good gravy. Which connects up to our ongoing theme here on this channel, which is, oh boy, creationists are really terrible at making use of sources and they misrepresent them constantly. Sal Cordova. I'll spell that into the Salvador, actually, Cordova. And he pops up. If you're familiar with an awful lot of the young Earth creationists and snippy snaps back and forth on, he's popped up in a very yes, Cordova. And he's people that Jackson and others, co-author Jackson, has bumped into over the years. I think he's operating at a much higher level of screw up than, say, your Nephilim Freeze and Kent Hovins and Standing for Truth and all that, where they're just purely rechanneling other people's viewpoints. Cordova kind of is trying to be innovative and focused, but this presentation wasn't going to do that. This is not helping him any. Anyway, on to our actual show. I don't know that Dapper Dino actually invented the term. I think he got it from someone else, but he loves it, and so do I. The Trojan Source, which is a reference to a creationist going out of their way to cite something which actually directly contradicts the claim they're making. And that's frankly not all that commonly done, in part because creationists often don't cite material at all, or they're very persnickety and careful about authority quoting, so that technically the text string is in there, so it's evasive. But a full Trojan source is one where, no, this is not, there's no shred of it. And we got perilously close to that over the previous many episodes. But here, one that just jumped right out, we present for your delight. And Sarfati and Tay are still trying to play up the existence of huge mammals, their term, back in the Cretaceous as somehow violating the, quote, evolutionary, yes, Kent does that a lot, evolutionary paradigm, via some trackways that were covered by a paper from Stanford et al. In 2018, which is on access, so I'll be putting a link up to that. This, as a general argument, is really stale, because there is nothing in evolutionary theory that says that some early mammal can't get as big as anything, frankly, even though from trackways and others, they were not expecting there to be or haven't found any evidence for really large mammals during the Cretaceous. You start getting them, though, that are maybe as big as a bear. That doesn't seem implausible. But Sarfati and Tay are making a mistake way below that level, because the paper did not, in fact, describe any huge mammals involved in the tracks. None. Zip. Zero. And then Sarfati and Tay compounded their ignorance by insisting that, quote, the paper suggested that all these creatures, big and small, were all moving slowly, quote, foraging as a social group, unquote. But why would huge dinosaurs, various kinds, both hunters and prey, vulnerable pterosaurs and mammals all forage together? The paper had made no such claim. The social group bit was mentioned once on a single page relating to the track forms, presumably, they thought, from a small theropod. So you had a bunch of little theropods that were apparently moving all in a group in this particular trackway, and that they thought that they might be foraging that way. That's all. So that meant that the concluding jump that Sarfati and Tay did, absolute claptrap wrong. Sarfati and Tay were saying, quote, the evidence suggests that these diverse creatures were all alive together at the time of the flood, as they were fleeing from rising floodwaters. No, sorry. So this is just a splendid, hi, Psy. Long time no see. I haven't been on the show in a while, although I haven't been sporadic and all these ups and downs and ins and outs of things. But at any rate, nice to see everybody in the live chat. And if anybody has any fun questions or topics to bring up, fire them away, because I am seeing everybody on the overlay chat. It's nice when Restream functions properly, ain't it? Yeah, there we go. So this, I think, is a perfect example of a blatant head up your ass Trojan Source citation. And it pops, of course, in my little list in my spreadsheet where I'm keeping track of how many technical papers they're citing and how they're using them. And as you've noted from previous books that we've gone into, the two Jensen books and Rupp and Sanford, they get above 50% misrepresentation. Well, Sarfati and Tay so far have left that behind, and they are currently running at 63% of their technical citations. I believe they are misrepresenting. Woo! Plus, a really high chunk of their work is simply recycling younger creationists, primarily CMI apologetics, including a lot of their own stuff, stuff co-authored by Sarfati, which, yeah, I can understand a certain degree of insularity on this front, but this is not standing out as a great benchmark, and will be alluded to as well in conjunction with the Ark Encounter Kinds list. That's going to be a whole chapter in Rocks for Their Volume 2, which I'm very proud of the first book, but I'm going to be uber proud of the second one, because I think we're all the work that Jackson and I are putting into this are pulling us even higher in terms of delving into the background explanations of things, the historical context, the realization of the current scientific literature and how it blows to smithereens arguments, and masses of really neat collating charts that will make clear to understand lots of different processes, including the range of diversity on how the flood was dated by creationists, to the kinds of misrepresentations and juggling act. This is the second I'm currently just finishing up on how creationists, young and old and intelligent design, who bump into the day 4 matter, all screwed up. It's a 100% failure rate. Nobody's able to get past this mess, and we'll be taxonomizing the only half a dozen approaches you can take to this, which is you can have creation with a parent age, you can have make the universe smaller, or you can have time speed up, or you can somehow have the topology of the universe such that things can seem to happen over long periods of time and yet still arrive in a young Earth creationist context where the light's showing up on day 4. There's a whole bunch of techniques that are muddled together on this, and fun to say that none of them have caught on fire in the creationist community. That you would find Jason Lyle niche supporting Jason Lyle, and the little Humphreys, who is a declining group. The Russell Humphrey stuff are declining. Creationists did a video on how common design doesn't work. Yes, indeed. Yeah, and we get a bunch of multiple tests in this front, including, we'll be alluding to in the new book, the examples that Jerry Bergman got tripped up on both by Erica and Danstern Cardinale on how Bergman is completely incapable of applying any of his young Earth creationist concepts to actual data field. And they can't tell phylogenetic listings to be able to discern a designer context from an undesigned one, even though he said he could. And likewise, they can just not figure out how things are for kinds in the human evolution field, distinguishing anything from anything. And that's why there's such a muddle in this area on so many different topics. And so it's going to be a neat little matter. I keep on adding additional sources on it, so it's going to be a monstrously comprehensive guide to so many of the positions where there's been several different catalogs, largely from young Earth creationists, who make like the list of 40 things evolutionists get wrong, or the 20 things that support creationism. And we're making a point. We covered a lot of it in volume 1 where we were bumping into them. The cosmology chapter in particular will be finishing off the listing so that we will have addressed directly and with primary sources every single one of the examples that they're bringing up. So everybody will have a good feel on it. Creation myth. So anyway, our part 2 thing relates to a 2022 post from Michael Oard. Remember, it is a dogma of young Earth creationism that there was only one flood, and it takes place 100 years-ish or so. I mean, one ice age, I should say. About 100 years or so after the flood. They're dicey on the terms and the dates. But that means that any indication of glaciation outside of that, all the glaciation data has got to be post-flood. And if you're dating the flood to the Cretaceous ending, as most creationists outside of the Tim Clary ICR orbit do, then that means anything that relates to glaciation prior to the Cenozoic can't be a glacier. Kills me to say evolutionists alive and turn around and need hyper-evolution since the flood. Yeah, yes, that's one of the really tremendous ironies. It's one of the things that we're dealing with a few litmus test elements about how creationism has evolved, and the hyper speciation thing is a perfectly fine example of that. And that and the day 4 problem are arguably two of the most catastrophically ginormous difficulties that young Earth creationists have to contend with, and ironically, old Earth creationists have to deal with a lot of these little problems too. And intelligent designers, they just resolve it by never thinking about it. So they don't really work out whether they ever think speciation ever happens, but they all kind of sound like they don't like it at all. But they don't. At least you have to give the young Earth creationists a degree of credit for biting the bullet in this. But then you have to realize they have no choice, because they have the creation week bottleneck and the flood bottleneck. And between the two of those, they have to be able to work out how the diversity and the fossil record could be generated in such short time. So they're forced into hyperspeciation. It took them a long time to get there. But this was the only destination that was going to be able to work. So long as they have the chronology that acts as the bottleneck 6,000 years ago for the creation. Remember, all kinds are created during the creation week, never after, 0. So that doesn't allow them any leeway. Anyway, Michael Oard is in a book, because remember, ice ages aren't mentioned in the Bible, so they don't have any scripture to run on. They have to kind of fake it around the edges. But it is really a mantra and a dogma that they are okay with one ice age. Well, this paper the couple papers that Oard is riffing off of, we'll be putting the link to Oard's materials on drop stones in cap carbonates. And it was, as usual, the tendency to riff off of a recent paper. So this is from a 2022 paper by Laharan, which I'll be putting in the linkage so you'll be able to read that as well, which is about signs of glacier drop stones back in the Cryogenian period, which is way Precambrian. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Precambrian rocks are not deemed to be part of the flood by any young Earth creationist perspective. There's wiggle room as to how far back into the Paleozoic it goes, but the Cryogenian shoots off the mark. So it is a requirement that those sorts of deposits can't possibly be glacial in nature. And what's ironic is that this is tripping over a thing where there's follow-up. And it all relates to the issue about plume world, which I think we mentioned in a previous episode peripherally. But anyway, we're putting the link up to that. It's a 2005 paper by Shields, and it's all about working out the impact of all of this stuff. There's a paper, unfortunately not open access yet, from just last year, which discusses this. But I'll show you that so you can see the little puppy. The lithium isotope evidence for a plume world scenario, aftermath of the Marino and snowball. So this issue about how climatology, and this is another thing that becomes very interesting, is that we are ultimately talking about climate science and how carbon dioxide from volcanic material, why the ice age, super ice ages would occur or not, what temperature material is going on. In fact, some of the areas on cosmological sidebars ultimately trip into issues that relate to climate science, and therefore the ideology of climate science deniers can come after a paper from one side and a creationist can be hitting it from another because they're quibbling over the technical materials. Oh yeah, the Bible explicitly, well, I can't say the Bible explicitly, there we go, states it's flat, but there are sufficient descriptions. Bible scholars have in fact just had to kind of interpolate and work out things by not merely what the Bible says, and this is true of all the other scriptures, Hindus and all these others, but what commentators comment about it. So when the scholars dive into it, and we'll be alluding to this certainly in the new book, that the biblical worldview was flat earth with a big firmament dome over it, and it's kind of resting on sort of pillars, metaphorical or otherwise, and there were some sorts of firmament-y things going on, which is where planets and stars were. You have to remember, it's not merely the commentary that you get from Christian philosophers in the Middle Ages on, but there's all the Talmud and the Jewish writers running for millennia. They've also been commenting on this because Genesis is their books in Torah. So you got sidebars, and now you can build up the perspectives of things. Plus, there's a huge scholarly consensus about the influence that both the Babylonian cosmology, which is where they're specifically getting the day 4 sequence from, but also a lot of Egyptian cosmology. They also envisaged like a goddess hovering over the thing with the stars on it and all that. One of the things that we'll be discussing in the new book in relation to the Hebrew cosmology, because the firmament figures in the flood and the opening the gates of heaven and all this kind of stuff that pops up, that they have to kind of think there's some sort of watery stuff, that maybe ice blobs are coming down. Kent Hovind envisages things like that. It's hilarious misplaced concreteness when all you have in reality is the realization that rain comes from up above. So, and they weren't thinking that the big shiny things were ridiculously far away, although they did realize the community, by the time you get it down to the Greek proto-science level, in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries BCE, their realization that whereas stars twinkle, planets don't, and the planets move relative to the firmament, as opposed to the stars, which seem to be fixed. The amount of observations that proto-astronomers were able to do naked eye on this point didn't really recognize that stars were moving, when in fact, yeah, they are. And we now know that in great detail in the telescopic era, but they had no way of knowing that. And so there would be no reason for them not to think that rain comes from up in the sky, it comes from clouds. Where do clouds come from? And they're up, way up. But how far up is the firmament? So there could indeed be like little holding bins up there that if you opened up windows, there would be water leaking down. The Hebrew text that we'll be alluding to in the new book in relation to the planets and stars in the firmament, they were speculating as to how thick the firmament was. Was it like a glass, or was it like mush? Was it like a fluid? They were thinking all sorts of wacky things, and then they would have some speculated that there were like the equivalent of little doggy doors for the planets that could be moving through the firmament, and they would go through these little openings and into other stuff. I mean, it was a level of funky, misplaced concreteness that's kind of charming in its own way, but it indicates that none of these people were really thinking through. And they had the descriptions in the Bible are so incredibly vague that you just can't get a coherent picture out of it unless you massage it and retrofit it and reinterpret. And so you get that on steroids by Hugh Ross and the people at Reasons to Believe. They're constantly trying to buff things up and argue that the expansion of the universe is shown in the Bible, and the Big Bang is alluded to in the Bible, and it's just tendentious crap. Which and they're very cagey about how they step around the implications that the world was flat, and the fact that nobody seemed to argue otherwise until quite a ways down the road. The only reason why the Christians ended up with a spherical earth is because they borrowed Greek science. So they took Aristotle and all that stuff as a package in the early church years. And so they had no problem folding that in, and they folded in the geocentrism. So they were still thinking in terms of a spherical planet that was the center of the universe around which everything moved. So they gradually evolved and adjusted their thing. But other niche areas still clung to the flat earth cosmology, and you have a certain level of that in Islamic ideology to this day. So anyway, no, well, Ross is sort of a kissing cousin. He's, I would classify him as an old earth creationist because he does deal with a lot of these cosmological issues. If anything, though, on an awful lot of topics, he's more vague and generic than the intelligent design movement. Plus, there's fewer of the Ross orbit. You've got Ross and Fazal Rana and Zwirink, and I'm not sure there's anybody else really doing much at Reasons to Believe. It's basically those three. And they sort of do tag team things on a lot of the same issues. A lot of material gets cycled over and over and over again. Ross is a pathological recycler. Holy smokes. You'll find things where Ross will be making some assertion and he's citing an earlier Ross. And if you look that one up, you discover that's making the same claim, but it's citing an earlier Ross. And there's just these burrowings down, and you have to often go down 2 or 3 or 4 layers back to works that are decades old to find out that he never actually offered any documentation for the point to begin with. So it's kind of a little mess. He's amiable. I've actually had a chat with him some years ago, maybe 2013 or so. I think he was, because I was just getting started on the YouTube things at that point, he contacted me, and I think he was wanting to have kind of an opportunity to strut old earth creationism, Reasons to Believe philosophy. And the conversation that I had with him did not go nearly as well as he was expecting, I think, because I knew about the points he was trying to make, and I was demolishing them bit by bit. And so he ended up never posting that interview. It never saw the light of day. And I think that you can hypothesize that he's probably done this with a lot of people. And if he feels that he's made a successful thing, then it'll get posted. If not, boop, it disappears off the back there. Muslim was correct. Why do not have 2 moons since Muhammad split it in half? Yes, exactly. That's yet another. Islam has its own defects. I suppose part of that comes from the fact that, unlike the Bible that was assembled from lots of different people over lots of different times with varying translations, and therefore you got a mushiness and doctrinal things between the Catholics and Orthodox, and then the Protestants come along and trim things down as well. Islam is derived entirely from a single book by a single writer that is right off the bat canonical. And of course, it undergoes little internal contradiction glibs because Muhammad is presumably dictating all of this stuff over a fairly good amount of time. So there's things where you forget what you said earlier and that, and so you can come into some mess. But it's remarkably vague, but has miraculous elements and accepts kind of sort of elements of Judaism, even has Jesus as a prophet and all of that. So it is a syncretic eccentricity. Whether it's any more of a distortion than, say, the Book of Mormon is for Christianity, somebody else can decide on that little puppy. Anyway, so that flat earth cosmology stayed in place and began to fizzle out in the early centuries of the Christian church as they adopted Aristotelian geocentric sphere Earth approach. So you still have little bits and pieces of the flat Earth cosmology. I think Cosmos into Plousty, something like that, was one of the last holdouts for a flat Earth cosmology. And it's no coincidence that the average flat earther will be a biblical creationist geocentrist. And it's hard to find a flat earther that doesn't fall into that category, but it's also somewhat difficult to tell because so many flat earthers can vomit videos and that without ever actually going into their background structure. A lot of preachers have made a prophet of Jesus. Well, that is definitely so. That is true for any. What if you have a financial vest avenue route, which you can do by receiving state subsidies in modern times, or you would have tithings and contributions to the church. The Mormons build that into it. The moment you have monetary incentives, where now there is a financial incentive, especially from the control people up at the top. If you're a preacher who is raking in millions of dollars, and my God, you got private planes and Rolls Royces and all these other things, that's a gravy train, and you don't want to get off it. So now, even if you come to doubt what you're telling was true, or whether you never believed it to begin with, but are just in it for the money, you're going to stay on that shtick because that's your livelihood. And they may have zero capacity to be able to do anything outside of that. This is one of the things that is sad about a lot of the people that I bumped into from the Clergy Project. And I knew one of the founders, Ray Ideas, where if you are somebody, and it looks like easily a few percentage point, 1 or 2% minimum, of preachers don't actually believe what they say anymore. But they have no alternative. They have no out. They have no skill set. They have no job skills that exist outside of being the preacher. So they're kind of stuck in that. So that's a very different dynamic from the ones who are the high on the hog mega preachers with all of the ego stroking crowds. You know, you're standing in front of the thousands of preachers. The types that would be ending up in the Clergy Project are far more likely to be from relatively small denominations rather than these ones that have these giant cathedrals to conspicuous consumption bit. It's kind of curious that there are certain philosophical structures that show up more prominently in other areas, whereas the culture, for one thing, the Jewish demographic is smaller, so you have fewer range to run with. And then they would have to be kind of like hyper conservative because the Jewish culture has modified things over considerable times as how they've interpreted material. There's various people who are in both that Islamic frame and the hyper-conservative. The thread here is hyper-conservative. It's true of the flat earth or geocentrists. They tend among Catholics and among Protestants and among Muslims, and in the Jewish framework, the odds are that they are extreme culture camp conservatives. And they are screaming bloody murder about lots more than the shape of the earth. They will have obsessions about gay people, and now trans will be the newer element. So that culture camp variable is not a universal, but boy, it's such a prominent feature. And it's the old term that I borrowed from Bismarck when he was describing the culture struggle, Kulturkampf, with the Catholic Church over parochial education back in the 1860s, 70s when they were building up the German Empire. And it's a handy little phrase. You could say culture war if you like, but I kind of like the foreign term to it because I can apply it universally to any groups. There's Hindu culture campers. There's, I'm sure there are some Buddhist culture campers. And so it's not ultimately a denominational thing, but it is a temperamental thing because we do know that political conservatism versus liberalism, there's different structures that are focusing in the brain and different attitudes that are going on. There's a different propensity towards towards believing conspiratorial thinking that is heightened amongst the kind of mindset that would be hyper-conservative. So it's an intricate mix of stuff, which Jackson and I presumably will be going into a couple books down the road, if and when we manage to pull off what may be a 3-volume tome on the origin and political structure of religion, which will go much more than just the Bible. Because in fact, most of the history of what human beings would be doing for religion predates the Bible and Hinduism and any of the old. You can only go back maybe 5, 6, 7, 8,000 years or so, and all the extant religions drop off the map in terms of the details of where they're coming from. You're now into a pre-written culture, agriculture worldview, and there's all sorts of little loose ends there that about all you can tell are things that are ritual artifacts and the fossils in people's legends. But I have no reason to think that the religious urge has not been going back way beyond that, and whether or not it goes all the way back into things before our species, that's going to be one of the interesting little problems to deal with. And you can find some cross connection with it in terms of neuropsychology and what genes are doing what and how long those have been around and mutating and so forth and so on. So it's a fun little topic to kind of deal with in there, and an ongoing one. That whole Christians today tend toward authoritarianism because of their God. Well, again, it's a mixed field. You've got the bigger the religion is, the more likely that there are broad range of belief. So Christianity is not a monolith. You can look at, say, a Catholicism. There are hyper-conservative Catholics, and there are really left-wing Catholics too. And look at all of the fuming that J.D. Vance and all the little neocon hyper-conservative Catholic converts have for the last couple popes, including the new Pope Leo, isn't it? And who just appointed a refugee as one of the bishops here in the United States, who was starting to dump on ICE activities. So it's an interesting far right wing feel more comfortable with the idea of having a strong leader who is always right. Yeah, well, there's the feedback loop that you can see in terms of authoritarianism and religious structure. One of the areas where this is playing out politically today would be the head of the Russian Orthodox Church and the symbiotic relationship that's been building up with Putin in there, which is kind of like latching on to the old czars back in the day. Things are more complicated when you move into the European Union and the dynamics in there. When Protestantism, Southern Baptist Convention is a perfectly fine illustrator. It's a niche group of Baptists, and the reason why it's the Southern Baptist Convention is because during the pre-Civil War period, the regular Baptists were moving into being anti-slavery, and so the Southern Baptist slaveholders simply pulled out and became their own separate church, and have always been the amongst the most extreme right-wing, authoritarian, coddling, hyper-conservative, Republican leaning, and high support for the Trump administration in 1.0 and 2.0. So the history of this stuff is important to deal with, but it's more complicated than thinking that religion is a block. And in part, it's because there's a certain tendency to just look at the squeaky wheels. The Christians who are out front, jumping up and down, appearing on the news, the Tony Perkins types, they may represent a small chunk of the belief system, but they have a disproportionate influence because they have attached themselves increasingly to a political party that plays on the national field. So there you got it. Get why they believe a pile of orange jello is a good leader. Well, it's an intriguing and complex mix. There's a lot of disparate connective threads to the MAGA movement, and it involves disaffected working people who have seen companies leave town and all of this stuff. It's this kind of stuff that J.D. Vance was been feeding off of. So it's a populist streak. But also, I think there was a conscious effort on the part of Trump to move into the Republican Party and tailor his message to them for power and influence, because he started out trying to do this with the Democrats. And the Democrats actually, back in the 80s or so, they actually do require you actually think something and believe it. Trump, it doesn't have an ideology other than kind of a generic, they're trying to exploit us thing, and America first-ish sort of. So Trump simply mutated and focused, and he correctly calculated that he could exploit the Republicans and inveigle themselves into there. And once then he got in charge, remember, he's been the dominant figure in the Republican Party so long that he is really, if you date it to like 2015 or so, when he's really starting to play things up, that's a decade. And that means that a lot of young people who were too young to have known even the George Bush era, because there was 8 years of Obama in between, that Trump had become the face of the Republican Party. So even if they aren't on board with everything Trump wants to do, or have problems with his temperament and foul mouth and snotty nature, nonetheless, they might think that, yeah, we need tariffs and or have to clear up the immigrant issue or some such thing. They'll kind of hold their nose and support the fellow. So there's ranges of support network going on. Now, it's no coincidence, sir, working for a candidate trying to unseat Andrew Taylor Greene. He lives in a district. Oh, I hope so. Things that he'll probably want to play off of there. And I mentioned it on, I mentioned it on American First. He wouldn't have put in tariffs. Yes. Well, a weird background in it, and it's kind of source methods questions. That's another bone that I have to pick about them. But it's an intriguing thing as to the narrow group of people, in part his Commerce Secretary and Secretary are part of this network, who have this obsession, Lutkin or Nutlick, as some people love to caustically call him, seem to be this kind of hyper pro-tariff sorts. At this point, Milton Friedman is rolling in his grave. He's practically an energy source spinning with fury over how the lessons were not learned on this point. And I mentioned in previous episodes on Now and Then that Trump's idea, he sort of filtered these things. I'm not sure how clearly he understands this stuff, but this has been a long-standing obsession for him. It apparently goes easily back into the 1970s. So his long before even the big surge in the two political parties towards Milton Friedman style free market approaches. But the mythology that he has about this 1870 to 1918 period is a very interesting little time frame. Because first of all, it's mythological. It wasn't a golden era, and tariffs had bad effects on a lot of things. But the 1918 or 1913 target that he puts on here is a revealing date, because that's when the income tax was put in and the Federal Reserve. So there's probably lurking behind, if not Trump himself, a lot of the people that are funneling information into him at Fox Trump Pravda and conversations that he might have with other people. But again, we don't know specifically, because reporters are not asking these kinds of source questions. This resonates with a lot of the stuff that you had been finding from the John Birch Society and all of that anti-Federal Reserve, anti-income tax crowd that you still find percolating around in the fringiest elements of young earth creationism, the Kent Hovind world and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of little stuff is swirling around going on in here. It's a thicket. But because Trump is a vampiric personality cult that requires everything be about what he says no matter what, it also has a downside, which is the problem when you find with the Tortugan mind, is because they can flip to A to B or A to not A with a drop of a hat. And then they will find a way of rationalizing it. And therefore, anybody that actually is a rigid ideologue if the God King Emperor suddenly decides to do something opposite. You found this with some of the actions that Mike Huckabee was doing in Oklahoma, what's his name? The idiot that was a governor of Texas there, became energy secretary, I think, in his first term, briefly. Forgotten his name, mercifully. That they could often flip and sometimes take socially liberal policies and stuff that wouldn't seem to be consistent with the viewpoint. But Tortukin's minds don't need to be consistent. As an isolationist, except for attacking Iran so he can build the next Club Med in Israel. Yes, or Gaza. Yeah. There's the real estate developer aspect of him, and a shallow one in question. That isolationism is a nice position to take if you're a lazy idiot, where foreign policy is hard, and thinking through the implications of foreign policy, that internationalist approach of to some extent being careful about what you do. George Bush Sr. tended to be a little more circumspect and tactical than George Bush Jr., who got us all involved in the Iraq War because he was listening to his little bright friends, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld and Dick Cheney in particular, the vice president, the bright kids in the room that were impressionable. Well, Trump, anybody, a doorknob is brighter than Donald Trump, but he doesn't care what you think. He will just not listen to you if you're not doing what he wants to do and thinking the way he wants to think. So there's a highly transactional element. It'll be interesting to find out after the shit hits the fan and people are out of the administration and writing memoirs, to kind of find out what was going on with him and Marco Rubio, who's starting to look more and more like he's swallowed a bug at every photo op, because it's going to devour his soul. I mean, he's probably the most intellectual of Trump's administration. Everybody else is at a much lower level. Vance is a Aaron Burr political opportunist who does probably believe a lot of ideology and has Teal Moneybags guy behind him. He's an ambitious, lean and hungry look to him. Hegseth, of course, is way out of his league, and if he stays off the wagon through his entire term as defense secretary, I'll be surprised. So it's going to be a grand Richard III level Shakespearean drama and comedy of errors, and we're going to be reaping the mess on all of this stuff. We're just waiting for what shoe to drop. Trump, he definitely will be wanting to conceal his physical difficulties if he has any difficulties. He seems to have a lot of blood hemorrhages and things on his hand and all that stuff, which is curious. But there's also the far more serious increasing dementia. His brain is cycling more and more and more on old tropes from years gone by, where he just repeats the same mantras over and over and over again. And since it's an incurable affliction and it's only going to get worse, there's going to be a point when he's forgetting who people are, where he's forgetting people he really shouldn't forget, like relatives. And because of his tendency to have hissy fits when challenged, there could be some really big blowups going. And at that point, then you have the enablement network to try to keep him out of the public eye. And then eventually it's going to be reaching the stage where they even can't do that. And then, of course, Vance will be just salivating in the wings, let's invoke the 25th Amendment and kick Trump out and make me president. So it's a lot of interesting variables that are going on in here. But you've got a lot of factors going on in relation to stuff that could be producing multiple crises. And I do not see the Trump administration as being very good dealing with lots of crises at the same time. The Iranians, this is a really intense violation of their sense of importance, and it's by the nasty Americans. And so the idea that they can't not respond somewhere, somehow, and significantly. What capability they have to do so, Remember, the B-2 bombers could slip in and drop their super bombs and zip back out, going all the way back to the United States, and did so with complete invisibility. But that doesn't mean that bases and the Strait of Hormuz and various other locations aren't potentially attackable in the same way that they're still able to lob lots and lots of bombs in the direction of the Israelis, and some of them get through the Iron Dome. So all bets are off. We don't know what the hell is going to happen. Well, yes, there's a national, and there's also the national pride issue. In the same way that the Chinese have a long-standing frustration at being looked down upon by so many different powers, including the Soviet Union. And now they ain't going to take that anymore, and they want to flex their muscles and be the world power that having over 1 billion people on the planet entitles them. Well, the Iranians have. I thought it was amusing and pathetic that turns that Tucker Carlson was, who's an anti-war person in this department, was grilling Ted Cruz and asked him how many people live in Iran, and Cruz didn't know. And 92 million, according to Tucker. It's not a that was one of the dynamics that was going on between the Iraqis and the Iranians, that the Iranians have a large population in the region, and they have a measure of technical expertise. They have an interestingly intricate technological basis of stuff. I mean, for an Islamic country, for example, they still teach evolution in the schools. They didn't modify much of the curriculum that was under the Shah. And they do put in the fact that they were run by the mullahs and all that stuff. That's and the regime, I think, its long-term shelf life is low, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be a pro anybody else administration, even if a new one comes along. I shouldn't think that any replacement that would be as coddling of the United States as the Shah's was. So things are complex. And Persians, of course, are in a group that's a standout linguistically. They're not an Arab culture, and there's a complex mix. They have ambitions. They've been an empire in times past, and they would probably love to see that again. So it's an interesting thing, and there are too many variables to try to make any predictions on the matter. So anyway, and let me therefore do thing I forgot to do, which was to thanks for all the people who have been holding into the project and continuing to support via Patreon, our colleagues at researchers, assistant researchers, friends, legacy patrons all over the years. I'm well aware of the fact that things can be dicey and are likely to get dicier financially. So everybody who's been able to stick it through all of this time, it makes a big difference to the little old guy in Spokane trying to do my bit for reason and science and all the rest. We managed to get in just about a whole show in there. So let me put also a little advert for Rocks for Their Volume 1. Doop, leap, beep, beep. Dump, dump, dump. Get my little thing up. Come on, come on. Little graphics. Presumably, there will be kind of a new little blip when the second volume comes out, which we may be able to do by the end of the year or not. We will see. I'm racing along. Once I finish up the cosmology chapter, then I'll be diving into the material and adding on to the Noah's Lost World chapter. That Jackson's part of it is already finished, and it's going to include some new material on whale evolution and some paleo world stuff that traces through the Grand Canyon as an exemplar. And then we got our human evolution chapter to tinker with. Oh, so much fun stuff going on in there, and the whole bit about how creationists try to browbeat Darwin over racism and the like. There's a lot of issues that's going on, and there's a lot of scholarship and things that have been done to clarify a lot of that, which is all going to be in the new book. So it'll be between the two of them. They will cover the whole breadth of the anti-evolution landscape and pseudoscience little hangers-on down in the basement, plus the big heavy-duty people, because you want to keep all the layers straight when dealing with this stuff. I think one of the things that gets troublesome is if people overuse the term creationist. I try to be very precise. When I use the term, typically I'm referring to young Earth creationism, and I will explicitly distinguish them from old Earth creationists and intelligent design sets, because there's a different focus, there's a different field of data, that you get some elements, a lot of the culture camp elements that are ubiquitous in young Earth creationism and intelligent design are rarer on a lot of issues in old Earth creationism, although you get some new twists of where trans issues have had people coming on the scene in the Reasons to Believe orbit that surprised Dan Stern Cardinale recently when he did a little video on the subject. So there's a layering of things and different cultural nexus that goes on. Just you've got young Earth creationism that tends to be more relentlessly Protestant, as opposed to intelligent design that has a kind of smushy ecumenical quality about it that brings in an awful lot of Roman Catholics. I mean, Michael Behe is a Roman Catholic, and some of the people that were pushing the material early on, William F. Buckley, Pat Buchanan, all come from a Roman Catholic environment. That would seem to connect up now politically with the neo-Catholics, J.D. Vance and others, although overall anti-evolutionism has not been a big forefront issue for that Trump culture camp network. There was no efforts made to push creationism during Trump 1.0. Whether or not that changes in Trump 2.0 is hard to say. So it's really kind of complex. Yeah. Well, my point of view there is that it's not craziness, it's bad method. One bad method to rule them all. What unites all of these people, and not merely the creationism, but we move out to different areas. People who think that flat Earth, or we didn't land on the moon, or the Holocaust didn't happen, or that everybody but Shakespeare wrote Shakespeare's plays. There's a whole nexus of people who believe things that are really not true. The thing that unites them all is that bad method. Their easy addiction to secondary sources, their reliance on extremely narrow data fields that they don't fact check, the inability to conceptualize things that would cause them to change their mind. Those traits, the Tortugan traits that I've been harping about for years and years and years, those are the kind of common diagnostic features. And so that's how you can find fellow travelers and people blurping into new areas. And it has a flip side, because nothing prevents a Tortugan mind from mapping onto things that are true. So some of the people who would actually be saying things that are actually true, nonetheless still could have a Tortugan mind, that they are superficial in their reasoning, that they're relying on secondary sources that say the thing. And we kind of cut them a lot of slack simply because they're saying things that are true. But the methods caliper is the measurement. And that's what the same point as I would want to see this starting to be used in relation to politics. Because while it's important to find out what a politician has to say as a policy matter, I want to know what source fields they're relying on. Because if they've got bad method, even if they may end up having a correct policy now and then, you still have bad method. And my general principle is Tortugan minds should never be in political power, regardless of their politics, because they can fall off the wayside at a moment's notice, and you tend to give them a deference that they don't deserve. So one bad method to rule them all, which is kind of a riff off of One Ring to Rule Them All from Lord of the Rings. And it's another catchphrase I would love people to use, just like Tortugans, but so far I'm not the most influential influencer on the planet. What can I say? So one bad method to rule them all. It's a universal caliper. It applies to everything, including me. And that's one of the reasons why I go to such big lengths to put sources up. Don't ever take my word for it. I may conceive of myself as a brilliant mind who can never make them. Well, I don't claim never made a mistake. I certainly have made goofs over the years, and it's easy to err because we're human beings. But to correct your errors, that requires sound method. And the moment you have incorrect method, like the House reps who voted for the big bill without reading, to be fair, that's not an uncommon defect, especially when you have these monster packages. I'm old enough to remember that every few years you're going to have a thing where there's some ridiculous 800-page monstrosity, and the average representative and senator is not reading every bit of it. And so they often have egg on their face over it. So that's part of the issue about bureaucracy. It's part of the issue about having complex bills with masses of texts. Bills have to be lawyerly, so lawyers and people with the terminology are playing into things, and you have interest groups and lobbying that are trying to make sure the wording is just the right thing so they can exploit it the way they want with their own interests. And that's politics, and it's an intrinsic part of a democratic institution. Where things get into an absolute mess is when you have too much of the electorate who are scientific illiterates, historical illiterates, and Tortugan minds themselves. How many Tortugan minds are in play that are on the Kant-Hovian level? 5, 10, 15, 20%. Hard. There's a spectrum. One could argue, and I use that young Earth creationism demographic as a handy litmus test, that if you can think that the Earth is 6,000 years old, you will probably also be making bad political judgments. So is it a coincidence that Tony Perkins, young Earth creationist who is channeled Kant-Hovian on occasion and then moves over to the Ken Ham Answers in Genesis style, is knee-deep, marinated in that whole Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation, Trump enablement world? Nope, not a surprise at all. And it fits their ideology. Doesn't happen in the Netherlands. Every law is voted on separately here, which, one point, Netherlands is a much smaller country, so you have fewer people, fewer voting, fewer legislation elements in there. But in principle, especially if you have a federalized system so that you can have an awful lot, one of the few things that I would have definitely continued to agree with William Buckley on is the notion that things that should be done at a local level should be done there, and then the state level only when you need to, and the federal level only when you need to, and so forth. So that the idea of a distributed system that isn't dependent on the top-down emperor approach. The problem with the irony, partly, of the Trump administration is you have a top-down emperor who wants to dictate, and ideologues who want to dictate everything downstream rather than getting a cooperative, dynamic, functioning system that's a truly federal one. One of the hopeful signs is that we do still have a federal system where you have independent states with an awful lot of independent power and independent institutions. And that's what makes Trump's overt federalizing of National Guards so worrisome. Entirely consistent with Project 2025 ambitions, but that's what we were warning was going to happen. So anyway, we're past an hour. We are all getting their information from VOW News. Yeah, so Foxtrot Pravda and the Trump administration ridiculously is staffed largely by media personalities. That's why Marco Rubio is actually kind of at the top of the heap for somebody that has at least a patina of gravitas. I don't like him, but nevertheless, he is like an Olympian intellect by comparison to the clowns farther downstream that are heading most of the departments, including Kash Patel and all that crowd. So what could go wrong? Everything can go wrong. And so it's going to be an exciting and murky time ahead. And in my view, the ticking time bomb is ticking because it's only a matter of time that the agricultural system gets kneecapped from the lack of people picking the crops, and you've got the construction industry slowing because so many of the construction people are undocumented, and hundreds of billions of dollars that would have been spent by these people in the economies, local and others, are reverberating there. Plus, you've got the tariff impacts. Plus, you've got the international implications. Plus, you've got tourism dropping from other countries that don't want to come over here. We'll see what the situation will be way down the road at the 28 Olympics, whether or not there's still one, or whether we've had a few more pandemics by then, or it's all bets are off, kids. All bets are off. So keep following that playbook. So anybody that's been following my comments in that, I've been warning all of these things. No Trumpista, none, not one of the 77 million voters who voted for Trump in 2024 can, with a straight face, say you weren't warned. We told you this was going to happen. It's appalling and revolting and fearful and disturbing, but surprising is not a term you can use. All of this is expected. And we're going to be seeing a lot of dominoes falling over and messes happening. And this may alter the dynamic. And maybe we could see the transformation that took place between 1928 and 1932 happening between 2024 and 2028. So anyway, exciting times to live. I don't like living in exciting times, but here we are. Everybody stay safe. If you've got weather conditions, apparently there's big heat waves through most of the country. It's fairly comfortable here. It's been raining for most of the day, which is fine and dandy. So we're up here in the Pacific Northwest, which is a different dynamic than some of these other little areas. And watch out for all the other vicissitudes of life. And if you're connected up with any of the people that are trying to stand up to ICE, be very, very cautious and careful. But at the same time, remember, you are American citizens with responsibilities and rights, and proceed as your conscience dictates. So it's going to be an interesting time, and we're going to find out who are real Americans and who are just sunshine idiot patriots who like to drape themselves in the flag and gunslinging. But when push comes to shove and they're really talking about the rights of people, they're as useful as my mother would have said as tits on a bowl. So see you all next week, kids, and everybody stay safe. And another installment next week will be another Casey Luskin episode, where I'm not expecting to see any papers that don't undermine the junk DNA data, but who knows what might happen. We have so many hundreds of them to go. So everybody stay safe, and we will see you all next week. Ending the stream now.